Winter, 1940. The light comes late and thin over the grass at Tangmere, a chalk white dawn sliding across frost-bitten turf and corrugated roofs, rimmed with ice. Breath turns to smoke as men lever open hangar doors that rasp like old lungs. Somewhere beyond the hedgerows, a milk cart creaks along a lane that hasn't heard laughter in months. In here, everything smells of paraffin, hot canvas, and the lingering tang of cordite that clings to skin even after washing. Engines cough awake in the gloom, a few turns of the prop, and then a throaty settle, the note so familiar it feels like furniture. Mechanics move in slow, efficient arcs, shoulders hunched against the cold, hands black with grease and stinging from the metal that steals heat on contact. They talk little. Words waste warmth. A spanner falls. The clink skittering across concrete, a curse follows in a county accent that might as well be a prayer. One man stays back from the bustle, a quiet figure with oil in the grooves of his knuckles and frost dusting the brim of his cap. They call him Thomas in the Book of Wages, Tom on the line. But mostly he is a shape at the edge of a lamp's cone, head bowed over a thing that doesn't love him back. He rubs a sleeve across the casing of a Browning 303 and leaves a dark crescent on the grey. He has slept 3 hours. He looks like a man who has stopped keeping count. It is not the barrel he stares at. It is the valve assembly under the wing, a knuckled joint of steel, and pipe he knows as well as the bones of his hand. The first time he heard the radio go dead in a fight, he thought it was weather. The second time he blamed ammunition, a bad run damp in the tin. By the fifth, when a Spitfire landed with victory smoke trailing from the exhausts, and the pilot's eyes shining with anger instead of relief, he knew it was neither. The guns worked on the ground. They worked for bursts. Then at height, in the blue cold above the channel, they died. He unbolts the cover with a care that would make a surgeon smile and places each screw in a jam jar like seeds he might plant later when all this is over. The metal bites his fingertips. He ignores it. He breathes through his mouth to stop the fog of his breath from clouding the lamp. A smear of grease on the cloth turns pale as it hits the frigid air and stiffens the way fat does when soup cools. He knows that texture too well. He hates it. Outside, boots drum past. A runner barks. Scramble in 10. Inside, nothing answers but the tick of the lamp and the slow complaint of a wrench under strain. Tom lifts the valve, weighs it as if the fault could declare itself by mass alone, then sets it down and traces the line back with his thumb. Air, pressure, moisture, cold. Simple words with cruel ways of combining. He has a notebook he keeps in his left breast pocket, a cheap thing with a spine that cracks when opened in this weather. In it are sketches that would make an engineer snort, arrows, waves, little hatching marks for frost. He draws another, the pipe in cross-section, a dot where the frost blooms first. He does not know the name of the exact equation that governs it. He only knows what he has seen. Pilots come and go like weather fronts. Faces you learn quickly because you cannot bear to learn them slowly. They slap shoulders, they joke without heat. They walk toward their aircraft with the gait of men who learnt as boys not to show the first flinch. One of them, Reed, the one with the sharp nose and the superstition about always tapping the rudder, pauses at Tom's bench. "Make my guns sing today, Tom." "I'll make them shout," Tom says, and the pilot grins and leaves, and the grin stays with Tom longer than the words. He sets the valve down. At the range behind the hangar, a test rig sits under a tarpaulin. The wind pushes the canvas, making it breathe. Tom strips it back. The barrels gleam like bones under ice. He sets a belt, checks the linkages out of habit he no longer needs, glances at the sky out of a habit he cannot shake. The sun is a pale coin behind cloud. The first squeeze is always a relief. A tidy chatter, the vibration hurrying through his forearms. The smell, immediate, of cordite and hot oil, the sound carrying across the flat field into the hedges where crows complain. Then silence, abrupt and insolent. The trigger stills, the mechanism locks. He waits for the whisper of steam to lift. It doesn't. He could scream. He doesn't. Back in the hangar, he lays the warm weapon on a bench that feels like ice. He works quickly, strip, inspect, note, reassemble. The liturgy of a man who has stopped believing in miracles and started believing in the repeatable. The valve again. The pipe again. The place where, when he lifts the fitting, water beads and the bead turns white. He touches it with a nail, and it cracks like spun sugar. Reed comes back on his feet and his fear. Hours later. The aircraft has holes that make Tom want to put his hands over them, as if he can stop the bite of air from reaching in and taking what it wants. The pilot is shouting before the prop has fully stopped. First burst, fine. Second burst, nothing. Jerry right there, nothing. His voice lifts, then breaks, and that sound is worse than any damage. Someone claps him on the shoulder. Someone else says, "You're here, old man." The hangar swallows the noise. Tom doesn't look up. If he looks at Reed, he will apologize, and he cannot apologize for a thing he does not yet know how to mend. He closes the valve with a deliberate turn that tells his hands he is still in charge of something. Night comes fast because the days are short and because war pulls darkness forward like a blanket. The blackout is total. Only red bulbs gleam like embers under eaves. The siren doesn't so much wail as begin in mid-sentence. It has said this too many times to bother with ceremony. The men duck without looking at one another. A few keep working. Tom is among them. He could go to the shelter. He could wait out the raid. Instead, he wheels the compressor to the far end, where the draught under the big door is a razor. He wants the cold. He wants the bite of it. He wants to feel what the gun will feel at 15,000 feet. He runs air through the line and watches the pressure gauge stutter into its place. He listens for the whisper he has come to dread. The thin hiss that means moisture has found a bend and is deciding whether to live as water or ice. He knows the parts that were meant to be here and the ones that were meant to be somewhere else but ended up here because the boxes came mixed, because someone in a depot far north of this airfield made a decision with a pencil and a timetable. He has swapped them around so many times the steel should be dizzy, midnight. The raids move inland and the sonic weight of them eases. The hangar smells of hot dust and oil, of wet wool steaming on a radiator one of the lads smuggled in and hid under a tarp. Tom sits on an upturned crate with the valve in his hands and turns it like a stone. He imagines air as something he can hold. Fingers spread, press here, release there, and the thought makes him smile though he didn't mean to. He goes still, because smiles feel like a waste of energy now. When he was a boy, he fixed his mother's kettle by wedging a bent penny under the lid to stop the rattle. He didn't know why it worked, only that it did. His mother called him a clever nuisance and kissed the top of his head. He has not thought of that in years. It arrives now, uninvited, smelling of coal and clean aprons. He takes his pencil and draws a circle. He draws a second, smaller circle inside it. He draws a slit. He draws arrows. The lamp hums. Morning again. The frost is thicker, furred across struts and cables like the air itself has grown fuzz. The commander walks the line with his jaw set, a man made of orders and the weight those orders cost. He stops at Tom's table, eyes the notebook, eyes the mess of parts, says, "They need to be right today." Tom nods. The man waits as if there should be a fuller answer. There isn't. He builds 2 guns. Identical save for one thing. On the first, he fits the assembly as issued. No extra breadth in the intake, no change in the throat. On the second, he files a curve into the mouth until the steel glows dull, and he can feel the line of it with his thumb as a smooth path, rather than a lip. Not wide. Wider is wasteful and weak, but turned softened like the lip of a jug that pours cleanly instead of spitting. Out on the range, the wind slices through his coat. He takes off a glove because skin knows more than leather does. He runs the first gun chatter. Halt. The familiar deadweight of the trigger. He doesn't bother to swear. He lays it aside like a stubborn child and turns to the second. The first burst is a heartbeat. The second is another. He counts, not with numbers, but with the way his chest tightens and waits, the way space narrows to the rectangle of target and the needles twitch. It runs longer, not a miracle. Not yet. Longer. The trigger softens under his finger and the mechanism carries its own rhythm. Then, silence. But after longer. He grins, because some part of him still can. He strips the gun on the range table, the cloth slipping on frost, slick steel. The ice pattern is different. It has not thumbed itself into a single hard white plug. It has braided, thin lace easy to clear, the way rime forms across a window rather than choking a keyhole. He leans close. He breathes out and watches the ice blue and then soften. He touches it and the filaments shiver and drop. In the mess at lunch, men talk about pie and cigarettes as if they talk about nothing else. Because to talk about anything else is to look at the empty places at the tables and the warm mugs that will not be lifted by the men who were here yesterday. Tom stands by the urn and spoons tea into a cup that has lost its handle. The steam rises. He thinks about how steam behaves and laughs into his sleeve, because he has become the kind of man who finds steam funny. He brings the notebook to the chief engineer mid-afternoon because courage comes and goes, and right then it is here. The chief's office is a shed with a map on the wall and a biscuit tin with nothing in it. The man looks at the page and then at Tom as if measuring which one requires more patience. You filed an issue part. I adjusted a flaw, Tom says, and keeps his eyes on the drawing so he will not see the dismissal arrive before the words. Protocol forbids alterations without approval. Protocol forbids losing aircraft because the air won't play fair. He didn't mean to say it like that. He hears the heat in it and wants to take it back with both hands. The chief rubs his eyelids. He is as tired as the rest of them. I'll pretend I didn't hear that. Do what you can do. Leave the designs to the people who. He stops, because they both know how that sentence ends, and neither can stand the taste of it. Get them in the air by dusk. Dusk is a smear, neither day nor night, everything the color of old tin. Tom stands under a wing and tightens a nut until the thread protests. He checks, rechecks, taps the feed with the back of his fingernail, listens to the ping of it, a small bright sound in the muffled world. Reed appears at his shoulder. No grin now, only a quiet, how are they? Hungry, Tom says. Make sure they get fed. Reed nods once. The canopy closes with that solid clunk Tom loves, because it means something is shut against the weather, and whatever is beyond the weather. The prop wakes, the air walks backward, wheels lift. Tom watches the grass pressed flat by the slipstream stand again, blade by blade, like courage. The radio is a crackle box in the corner of the hangar. Men drift toward it as if to a fire. The first voice up is not Reed's. It hardly ever is. They listen anyway. The chatter is clipped and professional. The way men talk when the world is trying to pull them apart. Tom doesn't blink for fear of missing a syllable that might be hope. Guns. A voice says, and stutters because the word carries too much. Guns are. It dissolves into noise. Another voice interrupts, laughing that hard laugh that is relief with its armor on. Not jamming. Repeat, not jamming. Tom leans his forehead against the chill of the wing root and closes his eyes, because the light is suddenly too bright though it is nearly dark outside. He opens them again because nothing is finished. The fight isn't over. He counts breaths the way he counted seconds on the range. He listens for Reed. He hears him at last, the tone a steadier thing than his hands are. Clear. 2 passes. Good effect. They come back with new holes and new stories, and a silence where fear used to sit. Reed swings down and looks at Tom as if there's some joke only the two of them know. They shouted, he says, not bothering with preamble. Whole way in. Tom nods because nodding is safer than speaking. He touches the wing as if the aircraft can feel gratitude. The metal is warmer now. A creature that has run and returned, night again. The raid returns with it, like rain that can smell fear. The siren lifts the roof and sets it back down crooked. Men in the shelter make the noises people make when the ground shakes. Breath through teeth, a word that could be a prayer or a curse depending on the vowel. Tom sits in the hangar because he is not ready to stop holding the day. He opens the notebook and writes without looking away from the valve. Intake radius increased. Flow steadied. Frost pattern changed, duration improved. He stops. He adds in a different, smaller hand, not enough yet. He thinks of water making its own shape as it moves through a kettle mouth. He thinks of air wearing a groove in steel, if you ask it to, the way a river wears an oxbow into a field. He thinks of heat, tiny and expensive, and how to put it where it matters instead of wasting it, where it looks good. He thinks of the word equalize and lets it sit in his mouth a while. He unscrews the cap again because he cannot bear not to. He holds the valve up to the light. He imagines the path inside as if he could walk it barefoot. If he stops the choke here, the pressure spike there will spit back into the line and knock everything blind. If he opens too much, he'll starve the feed. Somewhere between neatness and mess is a curve that air loves, the way swallows love a certain kind of evening. He files until the rasp sings a higher note, and the shape he wanted is no longer an idea, but a thing that reflects the lamp. He doesn't draw this one. He doesn't need to. He lays it down and looks at it like it might look back. A bomb falls close enough to pop the bulb and shower the bench with glass. The dark is immediate and total. For a moment, there is only the hiss of his own breath and the click of cooling filaments. Then a backup lamp shudders into life with a red, mean light that makes everything look like a submarine in a storybook. He laughs once, because if he doesn't, something else will happen instead. He sets the valve in place, hands moving by memory now, thread finding thread, the tiny snugness of a seal that sits just right. He tightens. He pauses. He loosens a quarter turn, because tight is not always true. He tightens again. He knows this better than he knows prayer. Somewhere out in the black, men are doing the brave part of the job. In here, he does the stubborn part. He closes the access panel. He wipes his hands on a rag that will never be clean again. He writes 2 words in the notebook and underlines them, test dawn. He tries to sleep on the bench, fails, stands, walks the length of the hangar counting steps. The cold lives in his boots now and will not move out. The sky whitens at the seam where roof meets world. The frost on the wingtips stratifies into lines as neat as ledger columns. He wakes the compressor. He fills the line. He runs the test. The first burst is good. The second is better. The third carries longer still, and there is a quality to the sound that makes him think of a kettle that no longer rattles on the boil, because someone bent a penny in just the right place a long time ago and called it cleverness without ceremony. It stops. Of course it stops. Nothing runs forever. But when he opens the valve and looks inside, the frost is a memory rather than a plug, a ghost of a thing that used to ruin mornings. He walks to the big door and pulls it up halfway, and the cold slaps his face clean. He grins at the empty field because there is no one else to grin at. He breathes in something that could be hope if you don't examine it too closely. He closes the door again because hope without proof is a luxury they cannot afford. He sets up another run. He takes the file back to the mouth, not to widen, but to polish, to take the burr off the lip, where even a burr is a tiny winter. He runs the test again. Longer. The gauge sits where he wanted it to sit, with that small shiver that means the system is alive rather than desperate. The first footsteps in the corridor tell him the day has arrived before the light does. Men drift in, rubbing eyes, slapping arms, asking about tea like tea is a plan. Reed appears with sleep still in the corners, and a question he doesn't ask because asking would break it. Tom doesn't make him. "We'll know today," he says, and hears the steadiness in his own voice like discovering a coin in a coat you thought was empty. Reed taps the rudder out of habit. The canopy closes. The slipstream flattens the grass again, and then lets it rise. Tom stands with his palm on the wing root as the aircraft moves, and lets his hand slide until air takes the place of metal, and his palm finds nothing. The radio chatters. The voices climb into the day the way men climb into a freezing river. Quickly, and with a gasp they pretend not to make. Tom listens, jaw aching from how hard his teeth are pressed together. There it is, not Reed. Another. Gunt's singing. A laugh answers it. Someone whoops like a boy and cuts it off, because boys are at home and men are here. He wants to run the length of the hangar. He wants to sleep for a week. He wants to take every valve on the field and teach it to love air the way he does right now. Instead, he writes quietly field test positive trend. Not final. He draws a line under it and closes the book with a soft thud. He doesn't know what name the thing will have, if it survives the day and the next. He doesn't know if anyone will remember who first uglified a neat drawing to make a curve air could live with. He does know this: the fault may not be in the weapon at all. It may, and always may have been, in the air that starves it, and the cold that corners that air, and the simple arrogance of expecting a machine built for summer to keep its promises in a winter sky. He breathes on the metal and watches the fog spread and vanish. He thinks, if I can teach it to breathe too, I can keep men alive. It is not a thought for a mechanic. It is a thought for a thief who intends to steal hours from death in increments of seconds. Outside, the sun climbs reluctantly. Inside, he tightens the last fitting on the next aircraft in line. The valve sits there, ordinary as a bolt, and contains a beginning. He says nothing. He doesn't have to. The day will say it for him soon enough. He wipes his hands and turns toward the range again, because a thing that worked once is a rumor until it works twice. As he walks, he hears Reed's voice come clean through the radio, level as his heartbeat. Second run. Clear. Returning. The hangar exhales as though it has lungs. Tom does not smile this time. He lets the quiet settle into his bones, heavy and welcome. He lays the next gun on the bench. He sets the file aside. He picks up the pencil. He writes what if the flaw isn't in the weapon, but in the air itself. He underlines it once, slowly, as if drawing a horizon. He closes the notebook and rests his hand on it, as if it were a chest with a steady pulse. He looks at the valve one more time, not as a problem now, but as a question that has finally decided to speak. And the answer, he suspects, will begin with the smallest change no one will notice until the sky itself does. The storm came without warning that night. Low clouds rolling in from the channel, rain turning the runway into a sheet of black glass. The hangars stood like hulking shadows against the lightning flashes that tore the horizon. Each boom shook loose dust from the rafters and rattled the empty teacups left on the mechanics' tables. Inside, the men worked in half light, under lamps that swung with each distant explosion. The air smelled of burnt oil and metal fatigue. Tools clinked, words were few. In war, silence was not peace. It was focus sharpened by necessity. Thomas was at the far end of the hangar, bent over a wing panel that glistened with rain. The engine crew had finished hours ago. Only he remained, sleeves rolled, eyes red from strain. His breath came in steady clouds as he leaned closer to the Browning's feed system, listening to the tick and hiss of cooling metal. He wasn't chasing perfection anymore. He was chasing truth. The same truth that had eluded every engineer, every report, every sleepless night since the failures began. He knew now that the problem wasn't simple. It never had been. At altitude, the air thinned, the temperature dropped, and the very breath that kept the gun alive turned traitor. Moisture condensed, froze, and seized the mechanism mid-fire. A killer no one could see, hiding in the lines of airflow and pressure. He pressed his palm against the side of the casing. The metal was damp. A droplet of water clung to his thumb, trembling before it froze. He watched it harden into a bead of ice, small, perfect, cruel. "Damn you," he whispered under his breath. He reached for his notes. Pages covered in sketches and calculations scrawled by a man who was never trained to make them. Diagrams of airflow valves, pipes, every line born from instinct and observation rather than theory. The higher officers laughed at his attempts. Mechanics didn't solve design flaws, they patched them. But Thomas wasn't patching anymore. He was dissecting. A door slammed open behind him. Sergeant Davis, his superior, stepped in, coat dripping with rain. His boots echoed through the hangar, stopping just short of the bench. "Still at it," he muttered. "It's 2 in the morning, Tom." Thomas didn't look up. They'll jam again if I stop now. Davis rubbed his eyes. You can't fight the weather, lad. The air's colder up there than any fix you can dream of. Thomas finally turned to face him. His eyes were hollow but bright with something dangerous. Conviction. Then I'll teach the air not to freeze. Davis sighed, half pity, half admiration. You sound like one of those inventors on the wireless. Be careful. Command doesn't like dreamers. Then they shouldn't have hired men who think, Thomas said quietly. Davis gave a small nod. Wordless approval hidden behind fatigue, then walked away. The door closed, and Thomas was alone again with the storm and his thoughts. He turned back to the table, running his hands across the components. The valve was small, insignificant, yet it controlled everything. The way air moved through it, the speed, the turbulence. The choke determined whether a pilot lived or died. He picked it up, turning it in his hand, the light catching on the edges. Somewhere, deep in his memory, came the sound of his mother's kettle. The hiss, the pressure, the moment before it whistled. Steam and steel, air and resistance. He saw it in his mind, a valve that released just enough to prevent bursting. A balance. He froze. The thought was fragile, like a candle flame. He couldn't breathe too hard or it would go out.